Hello, good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, and aloha. Welcome back to another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. My name's Luis Jimenez. We'll be bringing out our co-hosts and guests here in a second. Before we do, of course, got to pay the bills. Want to say thank you to DOS Tapes. They provide all of the tunes you hear on the show. Their Bandcamp link is in the description below. Want to also say that this show will be available on iTunes, podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast pleasure. You can find this show there. So please leave us a rate review. It goes a very long way. Patreon members, future Patreon members, current Patreon members, thank you so much for joining the Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can help support the show. It goes a very, very long way. Also with super chats and our new YouTube membership. If you want to be a member with a nice green highlighted name, you can do that now. Just click the join button down below. I want to say thank you to the moderators and remind you guys that we have links not only for our co-hosts and our guests, but we've also got links to Discord and our merch store. I want to say thank you and hello to the KGRADB family and our producer, Bill. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and bring in our co-hosts. As always, Mr. Rather Be Squidding, Mr. Michael Mataluni, as we get him every Friday. Sirs, how we doing?
Rocking, brother. Good to be here.
Yeah, man, it was a fun day. Today has been
busy for you, huh?
Real busy. I was helping Ryan produce his Lou Elizondo Christopher Mellon interview, which was great.
Yeah,
and maybe we'll talk to Bryce about it a little bit, because I think Christopher Mellon basically just laid down the playbook for the next big phone home and what we should be asking for and what our focus should be as far as when we go to contact our local state representatives. So that is very fun because it's, again, I think he's the best person to listen to when it comes to engaging our local and state reps, because he knows how to ask for things. I mean, he was within the intelligence community, so he, with a pinpoint accuracy, can really focus our efforts and focus what the pressure is, the pressure points that we're going to start pressing.
It's good to have an insider.
In the coming months. It's
good to get direction from an insider.
For sure. Speaking of insiders, I don't know. We'll ask Bryce if he considers himself an insider. But I tell you, what he is definitely is a writer, a producer. He's had features in television, and I'm not sure if he's made any films. I'm sure he has. He's a filmmaker and a writer. So he was a creator of 5-time primetime series, including Dark Skies on NBC from 2001 to 2003. He served as chairman and CEO of the Academy of Television and Art Sciences, and he came to Los Angeles as an on-air correspondent for CNN, where he covered presidential campaigns, space shuttle landings, among other stories. He's also served as an adjunct professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, teaching a graduate level producing class, Produce or Perish. And he's also a member of DGA, WGA, AFTRA, ATAS. Bryce has also authored books on the Beatles, JFK, and of course, UFOs. Without further ado, Mr. Bryce Zabel, how are you, sir?
I'm doing really good, and thanks for having me on. I mean, I don't know if I'm an insider, because I wouldn't know inside what, but I will tell you this. I am a little bit thrown by the fact that you did not share the memo with me that I had to have a tie, because now I feel like the odd man out. I feel like the outsider, not the insider.
You can thank the guy above me here for this one, okay? We originally, like every other UFO show out there, I was wearing hoodies and T-shirts. And then this guy right here came onto the team, and he started showing up every day in a tie. So I was like, well, I got to match that. I mean, we can't have, it's my show. I don't want everybody thinking it's his show because he's got the ties. So bada boom, we got ties.
And by the way, look what it did for the Beatles, just a so-so band, and then they put ties on, and the rest is history, right?
The rest is history.
You guys are like the Beatles of UFO podcasts. So there you go.
Man, I don't want to take that torch. That's for sure.
I guess that would make Ryan
setting us up for a lot of disappointment here. So Mr. Zabel, I mean, look, there's so many places.
You cannot call me that again. Stop.
Okay, all right.
Stop.
Bryce.
All right. Yeah.
Professor Zabel.
Don't do that either. That was
okay,
really
all right, strike two. There will not be a strike three, I promise. Bryce.
Yes, sir.
I don't know where to start. One of the most fascinating stories that I ever heard you told, and just because I'm an actor here in Los Angeles as well. I'm a production geek. I've helped write, produce. I've been in a whole bunch of TV shows, co-stars, little things here and there. one of the coolest stories I think I ever heard you tell, it just fascinated me a lot, and I would love for you to tell it here, is your elevator pitch for Dark Skies. I thought it was really cool how you went into the rooms, how you presented the whole pitch. I thought that was really cool. So if you could sort of touch on that a little bit, that'd be wonderful.
Well, listen, I think we got to bring people in the house here. Dark Skies, for people who probably weren't even born when it was on the air, was a late 90s NBC television series about an alien invasion. But the trick for it was that the invasion took place in the 1960s. The sort of the workplace environment for the entire series was Majestic 12. And a lot of people were pretty shocked that the pilot episode basically postulated that the main character got John Kennedy a piece of the Roswell crash, and that's why he was assassinated. So we were probably the most subversive television series ever on TV at the time, and maybe I don't know, maybe still are for those very reasons. Anyway, I created Dark Skies with my co-creator and friend, Brent V. Friedman. And Brent and I had met in I think it was, I can't remember exactly. I was producing the Mantis television series over at Fox, and his wife was my assistant. And she said, you really ought to meet with this guy. And my husband, she said, because he knows all this stuff that you think about all the time. And so I had produced a movie and written a movie for the Sci-Fi Channel called Official Denial. So I was coming off that, and Brent and I connected right away. And I still had the office at Universal, even though Mantis was winding down for me. So Brent and I spent pretty much every day for a month falling into the rabbit hole of ufology. Anyway, to answer your question, we thought it was such a weird thing that we were proposing to try to sell to a mainstream broadcast network that we thought the easiest way they could pass is to say, well, you won't be able to keep this up. It'll be too crazy. And it sounds interesting, but we don't think so. So we decided to write a Bible to end all Bibles. And frankly, this Bible, I was heartened to see, was just written up a couple of years ago as one of the 21 best Bibles in Hollywood at the time, or at now, of all time.
Wow.
What Brent and I did is we created a timeline that went from 65 million BC to 2030 or something. And we put it into a notebook, which we called the briefing document. And the briefing document basically started with the premise that in order to tell the truth about what's going on with UFOs, we're going to have to use the cover of fiction. And basically, if you're reading this, you've been recruited into that idea that we're going to have to tell it fictionally, even though it's the truth. So we made that Bible into a notebook. We put the notebook together with a front cover that basically said, this is the real deal. And, it had all the briefing stuff and all the classification stuff. We put a gold foil seal around the two corners of the Bible. Then we wrapped the Bible up in plain wrapping paper, and then we covered it with twine. Right. So it was interactive before internet interactivity. And on the day that we went to sell it, Brent wasn't in town. So I went with Jeff Sagansky, who was the head of Sony at the time. And Jeff and I went to ABC, NBC, and CBS all on the same day. And we went to each place and we told them what the show was about. And then we said, we're just going to leave this little document with you. And we left them the briefing document. And then we left. And that meant that each of these top network executives had this thing on their desk that was wrapped in plain paper with twine. And so they probably sat alone in their office and they got the scissors out and they cut the twine. And then they took that apart. Then they cut off the paper. And then here's this notebook. And on the cover of the notebook, it says, if you break this gold foil seal, you are testifying that you understand what the penalties for treason are, and that if you break the classification codes here, you will be held liable. So we're thinking, holy shit, I wonder what these people are going to, will they actually open it? Well, they opened it, and it told them, we're going to have to tell the truth under the cover of fiction. And long story short, and I know that was a longer answer to your question, but there's so much more to it.
That's exactly what I wanted. Yeah.
But what ended up happening
fantastic.
by the end of the day, we had two offers. We had NBC and CBS offering. We went with NBC, and I guess the rest, such as it is it's not quite history, but it is alternate history.
Wow.
Well, you said that Bible was, I'm sorry, rather to cut you off, it was considered in the top 20 Bibles of all time. I have a feeling, I don't know the history of this, but I have that feeling that Bible in particular changed. It was almost like the Star Wars for Bibles. Like, because after that, it was like, well, okay, now I've got to pitch this as if it's like they're part of the story.
Right.
So it was, I thought that was one of the most clever things, again, as a filmmaker, that I'd ever heard, because of course an executive is going to look at that and go, what the hell is this? Then open it and then go, wait a second, this is cool. And then crack the code, because they're probably some millionaire who does not care about repercussions whatsoever.
No.
And they're like, yeah, let me open this. And then boom, you get this really cool telling of, and I think a very wonderful perspective of how to tell this story as a cover up, but it's true. We cool.
Basically recruited the network executives into our conspiracy. You know, even though they probably thought, well, this is all just, nonsense. Part of them, when they were falling asleep at night, was like, what if it's not? Right. And so they kind of had that interactive thing. And the other thing I'll tell you is today you could probably do a lot better job with it. You have all the tools, you have, everybody's PowerPoint software, Canva, you have everything, and you could just make something really beautiful and wonderful out of it. And I think that'd probably be great. We didn't have that when we did this. We literally made it ourselves. We did the Xeroxing, we did all this stuff, the assembling, the collating, and I have to say, while we were doing it, we were having a lot of fun, because we just kept laughing to ourselves. Even if this goes freaking nowhere, we've had a hell of a time. And we just kind of thought that it might catch somebody's eye, and I guess it did.
You mentioned that you really spent a lot of time putting together this Bible, and it was something that you really went deep into. And you also mentioned that back then we didn't have things like Canva and all of these wonderful tools that we have now, including the internet. How did you do your research?
Oh, well, I mean, it's not like the internet didn't exist in some forms. Of course there was internet, but it wasn't like today, where I guess I'll be writing on a screenplay and I'll come up against something and I'll go, I wonder what they call that governmental thing. And then I'll just type in, what is the governmental thing that deals with trade? And then I'll get it. So we had to do our share of research, and we did. How do you do it? I collected Time and Newsweek for many years. I have a kind of a complete collection. I have a complete collection of Time and Newsweek in the 60s. So since we were telling a television series in the 60s, we had sort of source material. And then also, listen, as you mentioned in your intro, I'm a former CNN correspondent and TV reporter. And in fact, I was a PBS investigative reporter. So I sort of have some skill set when it comes to if you don't know something, how do you go find it out? And one of the things that I learned as a reporter is don't be afraid to pick up the phone and ask somebody what you don't know. I still do that today. I'm not afraid to tell somebody I don't know something, because there's only one way you're going to learn what you don't know, and that's to admit you don't know it and have somebody, bring you up to speed. So the answer to your question is, it probably took us longer. It was probably harder. Like, for example, instead of getting an instant piece of information, Brent and I would say, I'm going to work on this, this, and this, and you work on that, that, and that. And then we would sort of go to our respective corners for a day or two and do the research and come back. So again, something we might have found in 15 minutes or 15 seconds today took us, 2 days, but we did it anyway.
Is there any kernel of truth to the claims that this is, truth coming out as fiction? Were any of your sources government insiders or anything like that?
Let me put it this way. It's a good question, and there isn't a perfect answer, because for me to say yes or no would involve me knowing for sure who was and who isn't a government insider. All right. And this is something that, if you think about the disinformation that's affected the UFO, UAP topic all these 75 plus years, it is that disinformation has been paid for by the government and does exist. And let's face it, the very tactics that allowed us to convince Hitler we were going to attack at Pas de Calais, when in fact we attacked at Normandy, didn't go away after the war was won. They simply moved some of it to the Cold War and some of it, I believe, to the UFO issue. So the honest answer to your question is there are some connections that are quite disturbing on one level at the Dark Skies launch, and there are some connections that are just interesting. And you could make an argument. Brent and I did not get the idea for the series from a quote unquote government insider. All right. In particular, what happened to us happened after the series was on the air, where we were approached by people that said they were from the Office of Naval Intelligence. And that's another story. But let me just bifurcate your answer into two pieces. Nobody told us what to put on the air, even after we were on the air. When people did try to tell us what to do about it, we didn't take their advice. But
so what did they say when they reached out from the Office of Naval Intelligence?
That is a long story. And of course, we could do the 2 hours on that. And in fact, I will tell you this, I'm writing a book about it finally. I've decided that for a long time, I didn't want to talk about it too explicitly because I have a family, I have children. And at the time, I didn't want to put them in the public eye in that way, that kind of thing. But they're all grown now. So I'm not worried about that as much. And so I'm writing the book that will lay this out in detail. But the short answer to your question is that on September 26th of 1996, when Dark Skies was airing for the first time on NBC, and frankly, nobody had seen the pilot at that point other than the NBC executives and the Sony executives and those of us who worked on it, we threw a party at my house, same place I am right now. And we had like 200 people here. They were all members of the, some media, very few, mostly Sony executives and NBC executives and the cast and crew. And we all came together for a party. We all worked very hard on the series and we are very, very proud of it. And so we put TVs all over the backyard and it was a big party. And we had a Beatles impersonation band that we had used in one of our episodes called Dark Day's Night. And they played in our backyard. Okay, so the show has not aired. It is going to air in about an hour. And one of my staff writers comes to me and says, you got to go talk to this guy. There's a guy over at my barbecue of all places. He's actually wearing a blue blazer, sort of like me. He's got khakis and this blue blazer. He looks kind of preppy, all things considered. He's about 30 years old. What makes him stand out is that when people checked into our party, we gave them a magic badge, MAJIC, short for Majestic 12, the same badges that our Majestic 12 members in the cast wore when they were on the Majestic 12 set. That was the artifact of the 60s. And so as a kind of a souvenir of the party, everybody got their little magic badge that they would, pin on themselves. Well, what was different about the guy at the barbecue? He didn't have a magic badge.
What?
A. And B, I'd never seen him before in my life. And he said that he had come at the request of people who he implied were ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, and that they had seen our pilot and that they liked it very much. There were still some issues with it, and he offered his help.
Did he say the pilot was leaked to them, or?
Well, he didn't. That's what I said. I immediately said to him, well, okay, so you've seen my pilot. What happens after Lone Guard meets with patient zero? Right? Just kind of a test question. And he goes, oh, well, that's the scene out with the crop circle and the chase with the truck. So he was totally right. He had seen it. I don't know who showed it to him. I don't know how he saw it, but he had seen it. So that proved that part of it to be true. Now, it's not like it was classified, ultra umbra, top secret or anything, and nobody could get their hands on it. Obviously, in order to put a television series on the air, people have to see the pilot that you're putting on.
Well, there's also a lot of hands that make the pilot.
Yeah. And so it by itself, it's weird, but it's not completely impossible. Right. But it was weird that he had seen it and he was under these conditions. And he proceeded to say things such as, he took a napkin and he took a pen like this, and he kind of does this, and then he shows it to us. And I said, what is that? And it looks like a math equation. And he goes, it's the secret of the universe. And I went, okay. And he says, sound, light, and frequency. Okay. And I went, what about him? He goes, that's the secret of the universe. That's how it works. And at that point, I'm the host of a party with 200 people in my house. I have 3 young children, and I have a wife who is a little bit unnerved by the whole UFO issue anyway, and the fact that I'm falling deeper and deeper in the rabbit hole, having just produced this movie for the Sci-Fi Channel and now living UFOs 24/7 to produce the NBC series. And so, mindful of that, I asked him to leave. I just said, you may or may not be who you say you are. I have other things to do here. You weren't invited. I think it's appropriate for you to leave now. And he did. And there's
so you didn't get his notes. I'm curious to know what their notes were. Like, we liked it, but we got some suggestions. I mean, like, really?
Well, that is what happened. That is exactly what happened.
So they came back later with that, or
there's first of all, there's no they at that point. There's just the one guy. He said his name was JC. That's how he asked us to refer to him, JC. And again, I sort of threw him out of my house. All right, and went back to work, because you have to understand, when we were putting the pilot on the air that September, that doesn't mean we're not producing. We ended up producing 20 hours of TV, right? So the fact that the pilot was on, we were in production on, I don't know what it would be, but maybe it was only episode 8 or 7, 8, 9, something like that. And writing and producing and creating even bad television is a lot of work, but good television that aspires to be more than the average thing is a real challenge. And I reasoned it's not going to help me as the producer of this to get myself involved with this storyline, because I didn't believe him. I just thought this, it just can't be true. And frankly, my bosses at Sony, it was called Columbia TV back then, but my bosses at Sony and at NBC clearly would not have cared that Bryce was busy investigating the sound, light, and frequency as the secret of the universe, unless I could make an episode out of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it just seems like random information. Like, okay, yes.
Yeah, and it was random information at that time. Yeah. And you're certainly right. So life goes on. We go back to the office and we get back to work, and the ratings were okay, but we were up against not in the same time slot, but we were on at the same time as the X-Files was a big hit. And so there were a lot of people who should naturally have been attracted to our show who sort of felt like you had to pick sides. And so they were like, oh no, X-Files, and these guys are trying to rip off X-Files, which I have to say, that's the only part that really hurts me. It's just not true at all. But that's what some people thought. So I thought, I have to prove them wrong. I just have to do a better job, and I have to do my work. So I go back to work. We're producing, and this guy JC calls my partner Brent at the office and says, "Listen, I understand your partner, was a little flipped out that I just showed up at his house. So I get that. I'm sorry that went down that way. But we've decided that we can escalate this for you guys. Would you like to meet my boss?" And Brent said, okay. And announces to me that I can't remember if it was the next day or the day after, but he says, JC's bringing his boss and wants us to meet his boss. And I thought, okay, all right, but nowhere unusual. He's got to come to the office so that I've got the office security around me.
Smart.
I wanted, if it was weird and got weirder, I wanted office security, right?
Yeah.
So they come, 2 guys, and the guy's so-called boss, in contrast to the other guy, was older. I'd say he was 40 plus, but incredibly lean, like a Navy SEAL, hardcore lean. I mean, just cut. And
just like me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so they come to I come into that conference room, and there's these two guys. And what's weird is if it was just a big con, you'd think that they'd want to sort of kiss our ass a little bit and win us over, right? The guy that came in as his boss acted pissed off that he had to be there talking to a couple idiot Hollywood guys, right? He was kind of irritated, right? But he knew he had to do it, he said. And for 2 hours, they proceeded to brief us on some of the things we were getting right and wrong based on some of their interpretations of what they thought was, or said they thought was going on, etc. And I'm not really comfortable talking about everything they said. I'm going to save some things for the book. I'm going to save that particular briefing for the book with just one caveat. I mean, among the things we had people being taken over by a ganglion that sort of went in through your mouth or your nose or your ears or whatever, and sort of grew in your brain and they basically said, I mean, you got the history right, you got the feeling right, you got majestic right, but the ganglion is totally fucked up. Right? That's not the way it works. And I said, but we never set out to do a ganglion the way it works. In fact, Brent had come up with the ganglion because he was doing more horror films. And so he thought we needed that horror angle put into it. I was against it. I thought I wanted to do implants, biological / technological implants. Anyway, a couple hours go by and I'm not feeling it. I just feel like, I had a very busy day. I had, so many things that had to get done. I needed to get home to see my kids. I wanted to put them to bed, that kind of thing. And I just said,
but
okay,
also, I mean, like, I'm also thinking, I'm sorry to cut you off, but
please.
As like a showrunner essentially of a show, like these guys are taking 2 hours out of your day. I cannot imagine what you were like by hour and a half. And like, who the hell are you guys? And why are you critiquing my show? Like, what are your credentials? Like, this is so awkward.
But I have to say, I think we can all sort of understand what it might feel like if, I don't want to put anybody down, but let's just say somebody who was not O&I, somebody who was just kind of part of, won't this be fun to put one over on these Hollywood guys?
Right.
Those people would have come off a certain way.
Right.
These people came off hardcore business, like they were there to transact a deal, right? Okay, so the couple hours go by, and I just said, I kind of pushed away from the table and said, all right, gentlemen, thank you for your briefing. And by the way, the reason Brent and I took the briefing is we just thought, what fun. I mean, let's hear what whoever's done this, let's hear what their take is, right?
We could even write it into the show.
Put in a script.
We weren't going to write it into the show because we felt like if they weren't O&I, then somebody would say you stole our ideas, so we didn't want to do that. But there was enough of us that said maybe these are the real thing that we should listen to them. But I eventually pushed away and said, gentlemen, I got 3 kids. And I got a wife and I need to get home today and I got a lot of work to do. So thank you and goodbye. So I've done this twice now, right? I've sort of pushed them out twice. And then I'll give you the wrap to the story. And this part is so bizarre that you're going to say, I cannot freaking believe that Bryce is even telling me this story because it's too weird. But
I'm excited.
Another couple of days go by and Brent has sort of been made the go-between, if you will, because I think they're looking at me as a problem. I'm the guy that needs the trains to run on time and get the show done. And Brent is the guy, that
we'll get it done, man. We'll get it done.
Yeah. And Brent's like, it could be great. So, all right. So they call Brent up again. It's JC that calls Brent and he says, all right, listen, Bryce is a tougher customer than we anticipated. And you probably need a higher level of proof. And Brent said, I think that would be an adequate description of what Bryce is looking for. And they said, okay, well, there's a ship in Long Beach and you can meet the guy who's in charge. And maybe that'll maybe that will do the job for you. And
Wait, he wanted you to get on a boat?
well, that's just
A
it.
Navy boat?
Are we talking about getting on a ship in Long Beach? And they said no. And here's the part that'll blow you away. They said, the way this works is, it sounds crazy. We'll meet you in Long Beach at a cemetery at midnight.
Oh my God.
Jesus Christ.
And that's when I said,
how
that's
scary.
it. I'm not meeting anybody in any cemetery at midnight. Now, Brent and I actually compared notes a few years ago because I wanted to try to freshen this memory in my head about what we thought meeting in a cemetery at midnight meant. Okay. Because we never spoken about it. I took it to be some kind of cult initiation, some kind of, okay, we're all going to take blood oaths and roll in the mud in the cemetery and summon ghosts. I didn't know what it just felt kind of cultish or something. Brent thought that there was something in the cemetery they wanted to show us, like we were going to go dig up a grave and find a piece of the Roswell wreckage or something. I mean, so we had these two different takes on it. Anyway, it never happened, never saw them again. And that's kind of that story.
Can you tell us what cemetery?
I don't know. I'll be happy to meet you in a cemetery at midnight, but you don't want to do that.
Yeah, I think I might pass.
Okay, so
truly bizarre.
There's one thing that you touched on earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up because I love asking this question of all of our guests. But you mentioned your wife earlier,
yeah,
and how you were fully just submerged into this NBC show, and you had just come off the tails of another UFO show. How does she feel about this? Like, how does when we go to the holiday Christmas party, is it like, Bryce, oh my God, tell us about, does she get annoyed by it? Does she roll her eyes, or is she like, yeah, Bryce is on to something here?
She historically has been sort of uncomfortable about the topic. I would say that she's still uncomfortable about the topic, but on the other hand, I'm uncomfortable about the topic. So, I don't know that that's a disqualifier. I do know that she didn't want me going to a cemetery at midnight.
That's fair.
And the fact that the weirder aspects of that she wasn't big on. I don't think she's big on the fact that my public perception by doing things like this with you guys and doing Need to Know with Ross Coulthart. Whether she thinks those are necessarily the greatest things, but I will say she has come around because, she's a bright, literate woman with 3 college degrees who was a news person when I met her. And she knows, as well as you guys know and your audience knows, that there's something real going on here. And so she's up to speed with that. And to finish how she's come around, she and I have just finished writing a 1-hour drama pilot that we're entering the market with right now. It's called UAP. And I know that you guys started by talking about Chris Mellon. Chris Mellon is our consultant on it. So,
wow.
So that's Jackie great. And I have had meetings with Chris Mellon. So there you go.
Sounds like that might be a little bit of a truth coming out as fiction there.
It might. I think that's the kind of, that's my persona in screenwriting. Like I said, I kind of wear a couple of hats. One of them is sort of the Hollywood screenwriter thing. And then I'm willing to, talk in a journalistic way as well. I think you can be both, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Well, that's just neat to I'm sure that's been an interesting transition to see your significant other go through, yes. And I'm sure that's probably a little easier for you as well, because I kind of went through the same thing of like, I'm an actor in Los Angeles, man. Do I really want to start a show about this? Is this really like,
it's good for my career?
Is this good for the career? And then
right.
What's funny is I talked to my agents about it. They're like, we don't care. It's great. I was like,
yeah.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. That was a huge relief, but I kind of did it without asking permission. I was like, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission on this. So I just started the channel and went, and luckily enough, they were
particularly you're primarily an actor. Why would it make anybody upset, at that level? If as a, if I was trying to get hired as a newsman at NBC or CNN right now, it might be a problem, although it should be an advantage within a few years. So we'll
That's what
see
I'm
how that
thinking
turns
too.
out. It's interesting. You look, your family is always going to love you.
Right.
My kids love me and I love my kids, but I don't think any one of them has read the book I wrote. I mean, I've written 3 books. I don't think they've read any of them, right? I have a podcast that just recorded its 6th episode yesterday. I don't think any of my 3 kids have heard any episode in its entirety, and I can guarantee they're not watching now. So
I can make the same claim for my family.
Well, if you are Zabel offspring watching right now, please like and subscribe.
Yes, exactly. Hit that subscribe button, hit that
yeah.
like button right now.
So what do you make
yeah, go for it.
of the current representation of this topic in the mainstream news media? Having been somebody who's been on CNN and a newsman,
Sure.
what do you make of the current atmosphere in network?
I find it disappointing, to be candid. I know that it's increasingly, people are willing to write about it, but they tend to write about it amplifying something somebody else has written. So if somebody is a report comes out, you write about it, but you just basically write about it and move on. And I'll give you 3 examples. I think there's 3. The first is Harry Reid's death. I read every obituary I could get my hands on, with one exception in the mainstream media, which included 1 paragraph about it. None of them mentioned UAP. Now, how is that possible? Harry Reid, a Senate Majority Leader, spends the last years of his life very concerned about UAP, helped get the money for UAP research in the early 2000s, and spent his retirement talking about it and saying we needed to take interest in it, and nobody reports it. Now, I just think that's not responsible reporting. That's really lazy. And then the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which passes both houses of Congress and gets signed by the president and has all this language about UAP in it. And when Biden signed it, nobody reported about the UAP aspect of it. No, not in Time, not in Newsweek, not in, the Washington Post, not in anything major. To the best of my knowledge, I didn't see it mentioned anywhere, broken out and saying this is a big deal that Biden just signed it. And most recently, I just got a copy of Time magazine, where at the end of it, they have this thing, 7 questions, and they interviewed Bill Nelson, who is the NASA administrator, who has been very forthright and out front on the UAP issue. So you would think, if you got 7 questions, how about one of them about UAP, since he's willing to admit that it's real, since the government has said it, and since he's willing to say the extraterrestrial word out loud? But no mention of it whatsoever. So I am still disappointed. I think there is better work ahead for many of these people. And I just think that they have not fully shed the stigma that we think that they should.
Yeah. Real quick, just a follow-up to
Mike.
that. It's bizarre because we had such a spike. I think it was about 6 months ago, where you have 60 Minutes doing a huge story on it, and then we see people like Gadi Schwartz over at NBC, I believe that's his name.
Yeah.
And they're following the story like it's interesting, and then it just falls off the map. Is that strange to you?
Well, and it's not strange because it's sort of what they're doing. I mean, you think about it. Gadi Schwartz isn't breaking news. He is sort of reporting news and amplifying things that are out there in the zeitgeist. And even the 60 Minutes piece came at the tail end of a breaking thing. It's not like they said, we've been looking into it, and not only that, we found the crash wreckage. No, they didn't do that. They just did a survey piece. So I don't know that it necessarily went away. I believe I've heard that 60 Minutes is doing a follow-up, and I'm sure because I'm sure the first time they got a lot of eyeballs on it, and they'll want to do that again. But what we really need is what I call the cosmic Watergate kind of thing to kick in. Back in 1974, 75, when Watergate broke, it was Woodward and Bernstein, these 2 intrepid reporters at the Washington Post, who broke it. And at first, not only did they get all the accolades for it, but they also, could have lost their careers over it because they were putting their asses on the line to go report this story. But as the story got legs, if you will, then other places besides the Washington Post, New York Times, Time and Newsweek, and various other places started also covering it. I think that's what has to happen here. Maybe the New York Times this time was the starter gun for this, and it hasn't taken off quite as fast as it needs to. But I really think we are getting to a place where there's going to be combustion on this issue, and we haven't got there yet. We're amplifying news stories. We are not breaking news stories. Once the competition kicks in to break news stories, I say stand back. Of course, it's all about sound, light, and frequency anyway, so who cares?
Problem solved.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though, and here's what I noticed, and I agree with you. I think there needs to be like a cosmic Watergate type something, as because we always go back to 2017 in those 3 videos with the pilot testimonies that accompany them, and that was a big moment. But we need more, because now we've had 5 years to look at that. We've had the entire world be able to analyze all of those things. And though there seems to be a totality to this information, there are still ways to really poke holes in it, because that it's just not good enough yet. It's not good enough to kickstart that snowball that's going to roll into a bigger problem. But the thing that gives me hope, and I think you're right. I think we're on the shore of a beach and the tide is moving out, and it's moving out rapidly because there's going to be a tidal wave of curiosity on this topic very soon. And what I think is going to happen is mainstream news is going to be so behind the 8 ball on this, because they've been just ignoring it willingly to a point. And something's going to happen, and they're not going to have the correspondence or the information, and people are going to get information from them in a 3-minute soundbite, and they're going to find shows like yours, shows like mine, all these YouTubers and people that are just springing up out of nowhere, are all like new sprouts to this topic. And these are going to be the folks that people are going to start to rely on and get information on, because we've been talking about this, especially from a political perspective, for at least a year. So we've also, organized grassroots efforts to make sure that our politicians know what we want, what we're looking for. And we rely on Christopher Mellon. We rely on Lou Elizondo, and we try to take clues on where they would ask for information, how they would demand it. But what gives me hope is, for example, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. When she had tweeted out about the Gillibrand amendment, you can go through, I think I went back 3 or 4 months, but I'm pretty sure you could probably go back through the entire year and not find a tweet that was as retweeted, as liked, as shared, as heralded as just wonderful as that tweet that she had about her amendment. And I think from a political standpoint, you're starting to see politicians get note of that. They're like, oh, every time I talk about UFOs, it seems like people pay attention to what I'm saying. And people have a hunger for it. So I think that's going to encourage, that's why I think you see Republicans and Democrats coming from both sides of the aisle talking about this. And it's almost like nobody even cares what your political affiliations are. If you're talking about UFOs in a positive way, I'm going to listen. And so I think it's a golden opportunity for Washington to start building some trust with the American people. Because I think if they give us just a little bit that clarifies things, especially, that's going to win a lot of trust, which eventually I think is a good thing for the American government. We should be able to trust our American government. Not all of it. We should always question it, but there should be some level of trust. And I feel like that trust has eroded so much, especially within the last 10 to 12 years. And I think this topic is a great way to start rebuilding some of that trust with our government again. But they have to come to the table and start being a little more honest with this. Is that fair to say?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say it is the ultimate bipartisan issue. Certainly in the Congress last year, there were a couple of things that were bipartisan, but this was probably the biggest impactful one. And it's always been sort of bipartisan. I was just thinking yesterday, going back to 1974, kind of an interesting time. in 1974, in the summer of 1974, on the hard right, you had Ronald Reagan seeing a UFO while he's in a Cessna private jet chasing it. Okay. And on the left end of the spectrum, you had John Lennon seeing a UFO while standing naked outside his apartment.
Also Jimmy Carter too.
Left and well, that's 76. You're
Yeah.
right.
Well,
And
before Reagan.
And in fact, what I love about Carter is in 1980, when Carter and Reagan actually debated each other 3 times, and nobody brought this up, Carter was on public record as having seen a UFO. He spoke about it openly in 1976. And Reagan, even though he was not speaking openly about it in 80, the people in the media knew that he had seen a UFO. So, yeah, I mean, I think, look, politics moves a little more glacially. So I think we're getting there. You didn't mention it in the introduction, but one of the things I'm very proud of is that about 10 years ago, I wrote a book with Richard Dolan called AD After Disclosure. And the whole premise of the book was, how is our world going to change when we all finally admit that these things are real? Okay. Well, now we're finally admitting these things are real, but we thought maybe the snowball that you were talking about rolling down the hill, picking up speed, might be the New York Times article. It certainly seemed like it should be, but it hasn't turned out to be quite that. Not to say it's insignificant, hugely significant. The report last year, hugely significant, but not the event. Now, I was just thinking, for example, about what happened in 1952 in Washington, D.C., when for 2 weekends in a row, there are all those UFOs flying over Congress and the White House. That didn't reset things then. But if you imagine something bizarre like that happening today, witnessed by important people and the citizens and on radar and et cetera, with all the stuff we've got, that would be a total game changer. So there is the possibility that, and we just don't see it coming, that there is a game changer event that's not from us, that it's just something that's going to happen. If there is no game changer event that's from us, there still might be. And for example, I would say that the first journalistic mark that had to be met was just proving they're real. Well, that's been done. We know they're real. We're still pretending they might be from China or Russia or from us, but soon we're going to admit that they're not. And that's kind of a game-changing moment. But what I was going to say journalistically, the thing that could set the whole thing on fire and light the fuse, and I know that there are journalists working on it right now. Ross and I are working on it. I'm sure we're not alone. Is crash wreckage. There's too many people talking about crash wreckage. And when I was growing up, crash wreckage seemed like the stupidest, most ill-informed, bizarre, non-helpful thing to talk about. And it doesn't feel that way anymore. Now it feels like it's waiting out there. People have been acknowledging it sort of off the record and even semi on the record. And the next big shoe to drop in journalism will be the nuclear bomb of journalism, which is crash wreckage. That's the big story.
Do you think? Could I ask you this? We debate this on the show all the time.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, if there isn't a contact event, if it isn't one of those absolutely in your face blockbuster event, do we think that society really changes if there's nothing that would, even if the government comes out and says, oh yes, absolutely, even if there's no actual contact or engagement, right? Does society change in any way?
I think it's too late to put that genie back in the bottle. Yeah, I think I don't care I'd like the government to share their work. You know, they've been looking into it for 75 years. They may not have all the facts, but they've got better theories than I might have. And it's time for them to share their work. But I think we can acknowledge to ourselves now that with or without the government cooperation, and by the way, we might get cooperation from other governments besides the United States. The Vatican could have a disclosure event, right? So could the Kremlin, so could, lots of places. I just think we are on a historical moment, and I don't think it's that long off. I used to, by the way, when Dolan and I were writing the book, I was thinking more like, I'm not the young man I used to be, and I may not live to see this one. And I'm less the young man than I used to be 10 years after writing that book, but I think I'm going to live to see this one. I don't think it's a decade out. I think it's I think the 2020s are going to be the decade where this comes out. Now, whether the attempt to sort of manage people's expectations will be successful and society will give a big yawn to the whole thing. I mean, that's possible, maybe, but I don't think we're going to keep it in the bottle. Or to use another metaphor, that horse is out of the barn. It ain't going back in. We're just on a road to disclosure. And the final thing I'd say about that is it may help us to understand how we should or should not feel about this, to, even though I've written a book about disclosure, to not focus on the word disclosure, because that tends to sound like you think the president's going to come out and say, and by the way, there are gigabyte hard drives for every journalist in the audience here, and they've got all the photos and the documents on it. Let's go. I don't think that's happening, but I do think a better word for us right now is confirmation. And I do think confirmation is, well, it's already started. I mean, that report from last year confirmed that the things are real. And the next confirmation is they're really, really, really not Russia or China or us. And then the next confirmation out of that is it's somebody non-human. And then we're off to the races.
Yeah, I think that's where I think this is where me and Michael disagree, because he thinks I kind of agree with him. I think if let's say if the event is as big as the president coming out and telling the American people it's not Chinese, it's not Russian, this is what we think it is. Will that change? Obviously, it'll be a historical day, but will it change our politics? Will it change the way we do our everyday lives,
economic system,
our economic
people
system,
go to work,
technology? Whereas Michael thinks the thing that's really going to like change textbooks and change all of the societal implications would be like the little event of they land on a major body of land, and they go, here we are, here's our tech, this is our names, here you go, humanity, we're here to save you. Then
I'm not sure that's going to happen. I mean, that may be more sci-fi. Michael, I take your point. I do understand what you're saying here, but I feel like well, the whole premise of AD After Disclosure was exactly that. We devoted an entire book to it, a chapter to economics, a chapter to government, a chapter to science, a chapter to religion. And I'm not getting off my position of a decade ago. I think everything changes. We said that after 9/11, everything changes, and then it didn't. In fact, it got worse. But I don't think it's the same this time. Everything's going to change. Now, I don't think they're going to probably land on the White House lawn. But I do think that all of us together are smarter than any one of us. And so once we sort of tell the world it's okay for us to all talk about this, you can't look at the world the same way again. And at first, well, let me put it this way. Start hoarding your toilet paper right now in advance. And things will get bumpy. But then if we're lucky, mankind being very adaptable, we'll probably figure it out. I mean, I always take inspiration from Dr. Strangelove, the movie, and the George C. Scott character is General Buck Turgidson. And he's put on the spot about nuclear war, and the president is like, we can't find a nuclear, he's just, his hair's on fire over this thing. And Buck Turgidson looks at him and he says, I hope I got the quote right. He looks at him and he says, I ain't saying we're not going to get our hair mussed.
Right.
Okay. So I'm kind of in the Buck side of things. I ain't saying we're not going to get our hair mussed. I think we will. And if we're lucky, we'll manage it better than we have any right to expect right now. And, frankly, the COVID situation and even how we look at an attack on the nation's capital has been, these events, which you would tend to think can't be political, will probably become political. I mean, disclosure will be political. There will be one party that probably says, let's reach out in a spirit of brotherhood and peace and talk to these others. And they'll have another one saying, trust but verify.
Right.
We got to be hard. I believe it will be political. Why? I guess the thing that Dolan and I came to the conclusion, and we spent a year. I mean, it was one of the most fun things I ever did in my life, to spend a year talking to Richard Dolan about the future. And we just came to the conclusion that, life would go on, but everything would be turned upside down. And I still think that.
Do you think it makes much of a difference if we find out that they're, have an active interest in us, have been engaging society, versus if they've just been, we find out there is something weird going on there, but it seems to have a completely passive interest. It isn't actually interacting with us with any meaningful way. Do you think that would affect society's response?
Well, first of all, the one bottom line thing that Dolan and I came to a conclusion of is how we handle disclosure has a whole lot to do with what is disclosed, right? So who are these others? Are there lots of them? Are there a few of them? What do they want? Why are they here? Are they friendly? And I do think I always take inspiration from another quote. I'm not just all about Buck Turgidson. There was a physicist, J.S. Haldane, at the turn of the last century, and he said the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. So I tend to suspect that one of the reasons this has been so delayed and sort of being laid at the table of the public is that it's not easily explained or understood, and it may not be pleasant. Lou Elizondo is the guy that said it would, if people knew what he knew, it would be a somber thing for them. I feel like that may be true.
It's frequency, sound, and light, Bryce.
Yes. Indeed it is. Well, I was going to say, oh man, yeah. Where do you think these materials are going to come from? Because we've heard about materials or supposed crash retrieved materials from Jacques Vallée, and I know Gary Nolan has looked at these specimens under, electron microscopes, and they've done the isotope testing on these things, and it still doesn't seem to be enough
Right.
to move the needle. Like, what is this material? How, I guess. What do you think this material is going to be, and how is it going to be different from, say, those kind of materials?
Well, what makes you
Yeah.
confident that we have it?
Well, let's break this down.
Yeah.
The issues are materials, craft, bodies. Those are issues that people have talked about.
Right.
There's different levels of proof required on each of them, and okay. What makes me believe it? I happen to believe Roswell is an authentic event. So I go from that. It's why I did Dark Skies. I felt like if Roswell was true, then when John Kennedy was taking office in 1961, some 14 years later, a lot of things were happening that were hidden beneath the surface. And that's what the whole series was about. I still believe that. I believe there's been a lot of hidden history. But now I actually have some company in that thought, in that, listen, I think Lou Elizondo is a pretty stand-up guy. He seems to be pretty closely implying that it's true. Even Christopher Mellon is implying it's true. I wrote an article about Roswell that Mellon shared with everybody, which is kind of an indirect way of saying, hey, check this out. I don't know. I just feel like it's the thing. And the fact is, if there are, if there is craft and bodies that can be located and written about, there's a lot of ways this could go down. I mean, for example, right now there's nobody to sue and there's nothing to sue over. But if you knew that either a private entity or the government was holding on to such things, you could potentially file class action suits and take it all the way to the Supreme Court, forcing the disclosure of that. So there's just a lot of ways this might go down. I thought about a lot of different possibilities, and certainly as a screenwriter, I've come up with some that are more harebrained than others, I guess. But and I don't think any of us know. I don't think you three guys know, and I don't know, and Chris Mellon doesn't know, and neither does Lou Elizondo, and neither do the skeptics and debunkers. There's a strange and unusual and potentially bizarre and unsettling truth out there that has been prevented from being widely discussed for decades and decades and decades, that appears now to be poised to be discussed. And since we don't know exactly what it means, we are still in the dark as to how we're going to feel about it when we hear about it.
Mm.
There was a super chat question here from Mr. Badger, directed directly about the book that you wrote with Papa Dolan, as we affectionately call him around here.
Yeah.
Bryce, could you talk about how you feel about the current course of disclosure and how it differs from the perspective you and Papa Dolan wrote about in AD?
Papa Dolan. Okay.
I don't know. I just started calling him Papa Dolan on the show one day. It kind of just stuck.
I like it. I'm going to have to adopt that.
Yeah.
But now I was so taken by you talking about Papa Dolan that I missed the entire question. What is the question again?
Okay, so can you talk about how you feel about the current course of disclosure and how it differs from the perspective?
Oh, okay, that's a very good question.
Wrote in AD.
Yeah. Rich and I got that a lot in the last year, because when the 10-year mark came up, people wanted to know what we got right and what we got wrong. And again, it's impossible to state since we haven't had full disclosure. And so who knows? But I think we got more things right in sort of just the analysis of talking about, stock market and things like that. And by the way, here's one we got spectacularly right. In our first chapter, we said that if there was ever going to be any great public announcement on the issue of UFOs, it would come Friday after 4:00. All right. I said that as a journalist. I said that literally. I said it to Dolan, and he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because, the stock market will be closed, and it'll be a weekend, and the A team of reporters will have gone home for the weekend, and the B team will be on shift. And by Monday, you'll have had some time to figure out how it's going down." So that's what we put in that prediction. And guess what? When the UAP report came out on June 25th, it was a Friday after 4:00.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So we did get some things spectacularly right. Now,
they also, they kind of also, and not specifically Friday after 4, but they also tend to, at least in the last 5 years, it's been let's do it right before Thanksgiving or or Christmas, so everybody's in a shopping mode, and the media is sort of like, everybody in December, November,
absolutely,
they're just like ready to go home and eat turkey and drink and just get away from work. And so it's interesting that those updates also come in that time frame as well. So.
You're absolutely right. I think that might very well be how it goes down, because you do want a little bit of distraction. Although, again, who really knows? I think if I was going to say what we probably got wrong is we were focused more, let's use a Hollywood metaphor here. We were focused more on the hard cut than we were on the slow dissolve. All right. A hard cut is somebody in authority comes out and says, "Yep, it's all true, and here's some photos and videos, and okay, let the games begin." That's a hard cut. We go from what we called BC, which was before confirmation, to AD, which is after disclosure. And you do it, boom, all at once, right? It's clear to me now that part, even though we may get a hard cut in the next year or two, right now, though, the process has been the slow dissolve, right? Where the BC world is slowly giving way to the AD world. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's by design, that as we, granted, you're right, not everyone's talking about this right now, but more people are talking about it. And, in 2 or 3 years, there may be so many people that have talked about it, they're bored of it. Right. Yeah. And maybe when they finally do, then in 2 years from now, say, yeah, it's all true. And the Roswell thing. Yeah. Oh, here's the craft over there. We may just go, that's interesting. Wow. Cool. Who knows?
No, and I think, you're right. Nobody knows.
I will be jumping up and down and getting that napkin out of the safe and looking up sound, light, and frequency.
Yeah.
But
Indeed.
other people may not care. My I don't know. I mean, like I said, my wife is a very cool head, very bright woman, and she knows that this is coming, and she may say, wow, I'll be going, oh, my hair will be on fire. I'll be going, oh my God, did you see the Roswell crash? Oh my God, there's the craft. They got bodies. And my wife will go, yeah, I saw that. Listen, I got to go to Costco. Do you need bananas? Or
I feel like we have the same wife. Like,
I hope not. That would be just
that would be weird.
That would be weird.
That would be very strange. Rather, did you have a question?
Well, yeah. So I kind of have this personal theory where a lot of the recovered materials. My theory is that they might not actually be intact craft or even crash craft, but rather, spent fuel or other discarded waste things that are coming down as, liquid metal or something like that. I call it alien poop. But I'm curious, what makes you think that there actually are, craft and bodies at Roswell? What evidence kind of compels you into that line of thinking that it's, actual craft?
By the way, rather, I think that it's all of the above. I mean, there is goo and there are metals and this stuff. Two things. Let's first take the Roswell case. I just, listen, I've got several books under option about Roswell. I've written a movie about Roswell, about the competition to break it. So I've just sort of filled my head with it. And then I thought about it a lot for Dark Skies. And what I'm convinced is that if you're thinking about Roswell, there is not that one witness that tracked it from A to B to C to D and can tell that whole story by themselves. I don't think that person exists. Instead, there's between 300 and 600 people who have that one piece and that piece and that piece and that piece. And when you look at the mosaic, you go, well, something pretty extraordinary happened. And maybe we should just think that not everybody's lying. Not everybody is mistaking this. Even my father, who served in World War II and had a friend, he would always go to these, reunions, right? And so when Dark Skies was out, one of his guys that he had served with came up to him and said, your son's got that Dark Skies thing on, right, Harvey? And my dad said, yeah. And he said, well, you tell him to stay on that because he's right. I got transferred to Roswell after the war and I didn't see anything, but I saw how everybody acted, and they sure as hell would not be acting that way about any weather balloon. That was the biggest thing around, and nobody, could fail to understand that. You tell your son to stay on that. So I took that as kind of an interesting thing.
Let me ask you, can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Because there's other compelling evidence that it wasn't a weather balloon, but that it was something of greater interest during the Cold War, which would have been the U.S. attempting to use some sort of advanced balloon technology to listen in on jet streams to the Soviet Union, because we didn't have satellite data to pick up whether or not they were testing nuclear bombs. Have you heard that theory?
Of course. But I don't think that explains, Jesse Marcel, being, you look at the picture of Jesse Marcel, there is a man with the deer in the headlights look. And why? Because he's being forced to lie and he knows it. And think about it. These people were trusted with our nuclear weapons. Roswell, that group there is the group that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were trusted with our nation's most powerful weapons. Are we to say these people really didn't have a clue? And are we really to say that if it was even a classified balloon, that people would be really literally running around like their hair was on fire and shipping it here and there and the other place? But I don't want to make this all about Roswell. For example, I used to be the chairman of the TV Academy. I think you mentioned that. And I remember after 9/11, I ended up meeting with Daniel Sheehan, who some of you guys have probably heard his name. And he told me,
with him.
Yeah. Now, I don't know what you think about him or whatever, but he told me the story of, when he was, working, with the Carter administration, and he had been allowed into a room and he had literally seen the photo and he described it, and he's been remarkably consistent over the years. And I don't think he's making it up, but, other people might disagree. I just think there's an accretion of evidence about it. There's even a few things that I can't tell you about that Ross and I are looking into, that hopefully we'll be able to go public with, and but we don't want to. What I don't want to do is start just blathering stuff off that I don't have any proof for. I want to be able to prove it. So we're looking into it.
Well, do you have any of these? Because like the last couple of weeks, and I don't know how much attention you pay to stuff like this, but there's been sort of, we're starting to get to a point where we're getting really great philosophers and thinkers talking about this topic, and they're having conversations with people who have been in this field for a very long time, proposing a narrative on things. For example, Linda Moulton Howe just had a conversation with Kurt Jaimungal from Theories of Everything. And when the questions got even remotely difficult or pushed back a little bit on what was being said, the response to it was just like kind of shocking. In that, there's no explanation. And she's not like the question that's being asked is not being answered.
Who was being shocked? Are you saying that Kurt would ask Linda and she was not responsive and
correct?
And
took offense.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't want to get into bashing any one person.
No. I'm not
none of us should take offense about being questioned ever about anything. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. You're free to question me and disagree, and I'm free to question you and disagree, and until somebody actually puts the proof on the table, that's how it's got to be.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that and this is going to be the question that I ask you, in this illustrious career that you've had, is there ever a moment, and look, we've had this on the show where we've gotten things wrong and we've had to course correct and say, oh, look, we messed this up. And for me, I'm okay with being wrong on this. It's UFOs. Everyone's going to be wrong on this.
Yeah.
But it's how we react to when we've made a mistake, I think is very telling. And so I'm curious, has there ever been a moment where you were like, oh man, that's wrong, I should correct it? If so, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, I haven't actually, if you mean like the equivalent of writing a story, saying one thing and then realizing you got it wrong. I mean, I'm a journalist. Right. I would do what Ross would do. Both of us would just say, we were wrong. Here are the real facts, and you just have to suck it up if you got it wrong. I mean, that's what a journalist has to do.
That's refreshing. I think that's what a lot of especially the new people that are getting into this are kind of like demanding. They're going through the history and they're saying, okay, well, here are the questions I have. And sometimes those questions either don't get answered because they don't want to be answered, or when they are answered, there's like an attitude like, how dare you? It's just like, listen, I'm just trying to get clarity on this.
I will
not
tell
necessarily
you
that you have the answers, but it'd just be nice to see. Because
I'll give you an example. Because of my profile, particularly, and maybe not now, or I don't know. I'm not even going to speculate about that. But certainly when I was doing Dark Skies, I was kind of a lightning rod, as we already discussed. I mean, if the guys saying, even if they weren't from the ONI, they were still targeting me, so I guess I was a lightning rod. And during those, that period, somebody made a credible approach about having some aspect of a Roswell, a piece of the Roswell crash. All right. And so I started checking them out, and, the first few steps seemed okay. So I allowed myself to think, wow, maybe I've got it. Right. And so, I had a friend who I'd won several investigative reporting awards. He was a producer a friend and a producer who now works for 60 Minutes. And we had worked together. So I said, we need to protect the provenance of this thing. It can't just be me, because I'm a Hollywood producer, and I don't know that I have the ability to clarify the provenance of it. So let's roll in 60 Minutes, and we'll try to figure it out so that you can get this part through them in an observational way where they can report how they came to see this piece and how, all that stuff. All right. And what the guy immediately did was call me back and say, oh, I told my friends what you were proposing, and he's saying you're just trying to take advantage of me, so I will never speak to you again. Right. And I had to admit, okay, well, this guy's a phony. This is just bullshit.
Right.
And because I wanted to believe it, I allowed myself, more than a few nights where I thought maybe I'm really onto it. And it was just a con job. And I do think there are a lot of con jobs out there. So Michael in particular, because you've raised it. I mean, yeah, I've not fallen completely off the turnip truck on Roswell. My mind is open, but I put it at about 70% for me. For me, I say pretty close to 70% that at the end of the day, when we have to rewrite all the history books, the year 1947 is going to be a really interesting time. But from what I'm reading, there probably are some other potential crashes besides the Roswell one. So we'll see. I just wish I was going to be alive long enough to help write those history books, because I think we're going to have to get them all out. But that's one of the things I like to do. I kind of look at myself as a hidden historian, if you will, because I think what's interesting is to tell the story of America and the world, but mostly America, in a context where you sort of see the things that are going on, but also in the context of the actual history. So example, we talk about the 1952 Washington overflights. What's interesting to me is you can also tell that as a story where there's a presidential election going on in 1952, and the Democratic convention was going on, and Adlai Stevenson should have got a big bump out of the convention, but instead he got bumped below the fold of the newspapers because everybody was writing about the Washington UFOs, right? So I like to see these little hidden connections between things. And I think as history is going to be rewritten, and it must, we're going to see a whole new brand of historians have to get involved in it.
Do you think we're going to it's going to require more information from history to kind of move disclosure forward? Or do you think that potentially these new scientific endeavors like the Galileo project might kind of make a lot of that history moot if they discover, an active UFO in the skies today?
Well, if they actually discover an active UFO in the skies today, that's different. The Galileo project, for me, almost has a bit of a SETI quality. Let's just look way out there and see if we can find some evidence. And I just keep saying, stop looking way out there, folks. It's right here. Do your work here. So to the extent the Galileo project sort of pivots and starts, we do have the ability to perceive reality in our own space better than ever.
It's interesting you say that, because that's actually, so the Galileo project is two-pronged, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they're looking at it within the atmosphere for UFOs. He's looking for a megapixel picture of a UFO within the Earth's atmosphere.
And that would be a game changer, and that would be very helpful. And I support that. But at the very beginning, when Avi started talking about this, he was more talking about, we're going to find evidence of alien civilizations out there. And I think that he is rightfully pivoted. He's got some money and he should, use it. But I mean, I run a publication on Medium called Trail of the Saucers. It's kind of a writer's collective of essays and so forth. And Avi Loeb is one of our contributors. And he's written over a dozen articles for us. And consistently, he's been talking about out there. And I think it's a good pivot on the Galileo project to pivot to down here, just in the same way that, listen, it would be great if the SETI project had said, well, look, we've got this signal and we've transcribed it and look what it says. That would be lovely. But it always struck me as kind of a sham to spend money and time and effort looking out there when there's something going on down here. So,
let's say if
go ahead. Sorry, Ruther.
Well, let's say that the James Webb Space Telescope looks out to a distant exoplanet and finds signs of life. Maybe not even intelligent life. Do you think that would eliminate the stigma of the more terrestrial UFOs? Or do you think that would advance the discussion, or do you think that would just be kind of a?
It's a great question. Rather, I don't think it would hurt. I mean, it might not hurt, but it may not do the job. Because then it's still at a distance. People, what have we learned from history? One of the things that we decided on after disclosure, Papa Dolan and myself, was that if you want the answers to how we're going to handle disclosure, look at history, right? So if you want to know what's going to happen to the stock market, well, during the Great Depression, we had a bank holiday and closed the stock market down. We'll probably do that again. You look for things that sort of tell you how things will be handled. And what history shows us over and over is that people don't really deal with stuff until it's in their own neighborhood, and they wait till the last minute. That's even true of the report. When was the UAP report released last year? On the last possible day. Okay. Now there's, in the new NDAA language, it says there will be a new one released every year, no later than October 31st. Well, I can guarantee you it'll come out October 31st. That's just how it's going to happen. And what I think, by the way, is so great about that, and then I'll get back to what you were asking about, but we're about to have an October surprise in the midterm elections of 2022. There's going to be a UAP report for the public that is released on October 31st. 8 days later is the midterm election. So certain politicians are going to have to talk about it, and will talk about it. And that may usher in a period where the stigma gets sanded away just a little bit, so that in 2024, it can actually be in a presidential debate, which would be great. So the answer to your question, though, rather, is I believe if we got a SETI message, or if we got, confirmation from the James Webb, it would be a game changer, but it would be a game ender? No, probably not, because it's still in somebody else's neighborhood, right? The game changer would be what we discussed about the Galileo project. If somebody comes back with an HD quality photo of an obviously alien structure or ship or base or something, I mean, that is game over. I mean, it's not like it ends the discussion, but it ends the debate about whether it's real or not. And once the debate about whether it's real or not is finally put to bed, that marks day one when we get to work on trying to figure out what we're dealing with.
Yeah, the real discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think we've heard Representative Andre Carson out of Indiana, and we've heard Representative Tim Burchett out of Tennessee, and both of them within the last month or 2 months have called for public hearings.
Yep.
And this is something we were asking for during the Big Phone Home. And so I think there's also a shot before that October 31st report comes out, and in between when this new UAP office is supposed to be running by, I think that you got a window there where we might even see some public hearings that accompany that.
I would like to believe that. I don't think you'll see public hearings before that next report. I just don't think that they're going to move on public hearings. You might see some.
Well, I didn't think so either until I started hearing, reps from these intelligence committees coming out and saying we should have public hearings on this. Which
but even if you've got even if you've got the will to have public hearings, it takes a while. And remember, even when there was Watergate, it took a long time to get the public hearings. Those Senate Watergate hearings didn't happen for well over a year after the sort of the impetus for it. They almost came too late. But boy, was the nation transfixed. So, I don't want to quibble over the dates. I do think you're correct. I do think if you look at the, look to the future, I think within 2 years you have public hearings. I just am questioning whether it'll be in this next year time period. It may take a while to sort of reach, critical mass on that. But when they happen, I mean, wow. I mean, let's bring some of these pilots in, and let's let the public listen to them tell their stories, and let's see that people like Burchett and Carson, who are in different political parties, let's see them not look like they hate each other. Let's see them look like they're on the same team, which would be fascinating. And I bet if the Senate Watergate, I remember the Senate Watergate hearings. That's why I say I'm not the young man I used to be. And I remember being transfixed by them. And I think Senate hearings, for example, on UAP are like 5 times as interesting. So
as opposed to baseball or the NFL.
Yeah, I can. I'll take a pass. I mean, I love baseball. I love NFL, but I'll tell you, I want to see those hearings.
Not on the Senate floor. It's
yeah.
That's true.
I also love those sports, but on the Senate floor, it was just a nightmare. Well, switching gears a little bit, I mean, the thing that I really love about what you're doing right now is that you've teamed up with Ross Coulthart
Yeah.
on a new podcast called Need to Know. And I was listening to a couple episodes over the week, and I just got done with the presidential, how presidents have sort of commented on this over the decades. And so that was a fascinating conversation as well. What do you hope to accomplish with this? Because it seems to me like the goal of this podcast is to have legitimate journalists, unlike these three schmoes right here, talking about and adding legitimacy to the discsion. So
we have ties on, Lou.
We do have ties on, so therefore we're our legitimacy is notched up just a little bit.
Well, you know what? I look like a presidential candidate without the tie. There's nobody wear ties anymore.
You just need a pin.
Yeah, you just need a pin.
I need the pen, then that'll be good.
You'll be good.
Well, let me just that's true. Kind of an interesting story about Ross Coulthard and myself. I read his book last year, and I just, like I said, I'm not shy, and as a former journalist, I sort of know how to pick up the phone or send an email or whatever, and I'll just do it. So I reached out to him and just said, and I heard he wanted to talk to me. This is the weird thing about it. I had gone to Australia in December of 2019 with my family for a month. We wanted to get away from the brush fires that were here. We got to Australia and the whole country was on fire.
I was just about to say, yeah.
So we spent an entire month running from bushfires, is what they call them in Australia. And I was supposed to meet Ross Coulthard then, and it didn't happen because literally our whole schedule got thrown into the fire, if you will. And so we had been meaning to talk to each other. I read his book, and we reached out and we started having these Zoom conferences with each other, and we realized how much we had in common. We both have been we're both trained broadcasters. We worked in investigative journalism, won awards for investigative journalism, and are fascinated by the UAP story as well. We should, I guess. And we were having so many of these, and they were so interesting to us. One of us, I can't remember who, said, what if we just sort of put these on,
start recording
out there? What if we hit record? What would that be? And we decided to just give it a try, and we just did it. We just started. Now, I will tell you this, and no offense to anyone here, but we just asked ourselves, does the world really need another UFO podcast? And the answer, which I don't think will surprise anyone listening or yourselves, right, is no. The world does not need another UFO podcast. So what Ross and I ask ourselves is, can we do something different? Because there's no reason. What you guys do is very fascinating, and my hat is off to you. And you've just hit a sweet spot, and congratulations to you. But what we were thinking is, well, we've got to find a new way into it, or what's the point? So for us, it was the fact that we've got the journalistic background, and that we both started as deep skeptics, and we both did the work and started realizing there was more to this than we could think. And then we also thought, well, let's try to do something really radical. Let's be short. So we said, we're never going to go we're going to try to go less than 45 minutes. And the idea is we're not going to have guests, at least not at the beginning, no guests, because we're just going to try to have a conversation between the two of us. So in other words, we'll pick a topic, and then the job is you got to bone up on it, because you're going to have to talk to somebody about it, and you can't hide because you're on camera. So you can't be looking at a book or whatever. So, and then we just started doing it, and we kind of like it. And I think people enjoy it, but it's short and sweet. And, we'll just see how it goes. I think, though, you hit it on the head. I mean, we just thought maybe there is a slice of the audience that's interested in this that might want to hear a couple of guys who are semi-informed, just sort of sharing information with each other and kind of striving toward a deeper set of knowledge. So we try to be something that could appeal to people who do know about it, but also to people like my wife and my children, who, as I said, don't listen to my podcast, but maybe they will one day. And, maybe when they hear it, they'll say, oh, I didn't know you knew about all that, because we don't talk about it at all. But and we'll see, because the truth of the matter is, if it doesn't work, we'll stop doing it. But I thank you for bringing it up. And if anyone does want to listen to it, just go to needtoknow.today, and that'll connect you to all the different versions, as you guys so aptly know. There's a lot of places to get a podcast, standard things. We're new to it, but we're learning.
I think you guys are doing an amazing job considering you're only 10 episodes in. I don't even.
We're not even. We're 6.
Yeah,
and the truth is, we're experimental enough to say, well, did that work? Well, yeah, that kind of worked. Let's do more of that. Did that work? No, that did not work. Don't do that again. And maybe we'll get it right by the end of the year.
Well, thank you, Tina, for posting the link to the podcast right here in the chat. So, guys, go check that out and subscribe because it's worth your time. I mean, the thing is, when we've had Ross on, it's so. For me, it's such a like pleasure. It's almost like a little icing on the cake to see that you guys have a podcast that I could go to now anytime I want to hear. Because the beautiful thing about Ross Coulthard's book, I bought it on audiobook. So listening to that man's voice while I'm like, I can listen to that all day. You know? No problem. So I do like the idea that you guys made it short. You made it simple. It's two guys talking shop who know particularly a lot about the subject because, again, your journalistic background. So I think it's a winner. I absolutely love it. So I wish you all the luck. And I know this, eventually with any new podcast, those things are going to grow, especially once it finds its audience, and especially from a production level, you guys find your voice with it, and it seems like you're
well,
rocking.
and the other thing is, maybe one day Ross and I'll actually meet in person.
Right.
So far,
well, that's the whole thing. Yeah, none of us have ever met each other either. So that's another thing too. Is hopefully the world will be able to get back to some sort of semblance of normal, and then we can have actual human interactions again.
One of the interesting side benefits to doing a podcast with Ross Coulthard is, a lot of times on podcasts, if you're just listening to it, now, of course, we're on a video at the same time, but if you're just listening to it, sometimes you can go, now, who is that speaking again? Who asked that question or whatever. When you're doing something with Ross Coulthard, nobody wonders who Ross is and who Bryce is. In fact, if anything, what I love about it is he comes up out of nowhere with these sort of metaphorical expressions that are really second nature in Australia, and they blow me away. I'm like, where did that come from? And then I'll say things that he's not, aware of. Because our cultures are very similar, but they're like in a parallel universe. Right. So I said to him, I made some reference the other day, not on the air, but I said, yeah, it's like Siskel and Ebert. And he's like, I don't know who is it. Right? And
you mean Laurel and Wintergan.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're huge here.
But he's a terrific guy, and he's a harder working, he is doing the work. He works sources. He is a brilliant investigative reporter. And I think more people who are actually pulling down big paychecks for doing that should take a page and take a lesson from it.
Yeah, I think what I love about his work as well is that he's almost like a chameleon. He's able to go into 60 minutes mode essentially, and then go on a podcast like yours or even mine and just be so personable, so easy to talk to. But what I love is that he's bringing eyeballs to it, and also he's getting, I feel like he without doing much other than obviously the work, but the work speaks for itself so well that I feel like those production companies in Australia are like, oh, look at that. And and maybe you could speak to this for us, Bryce, because you've worked in these newsrooms. When the 60 Minutes piece came out, and you go to the YouTube channel for 60 Minutes, and again, it's similar to what the Gillibrand tweet, that 60 Minutes hit had more, by millions than any other piece that they had done on their channel. And that was just in 2 days after it was posted. So how is it possible that the producers at 60 Minutes or CBS aren't going, holy cow, do you see the numbers on this? Why do we not have a division to talk about this once a month, once a week, once a year, at least? I just don't understand. I usually my experience is Hollywood is if the dollars are there, Hollywood's right behind there to follow. And so I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that. Why
the dollars are there in Hollywood to follow. You can get another season of Ancient Aliens anytime or that kind of thing. 60 Minutes is a different thing. They are very concerned about their
image,
perception and their image, right? And one of the things that Ross and I learned is that up to 2 hours before that piece aired, Bill Whitaker was having a meltdown about whether they should air it or not. Because why? He didn't want to ruin his reputation, right?
I wonder what Bill Whitaker thinks today, though. Now that it's done, it's been aired, and he sees the numbers. Like, why is Bill Whitaker not going?
Well, I think they are doing.
There's nothing to fear here.
I think you're going to see 60 Minutes do a follow-up piece. I think you're going to, but again, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. Yes, they'll follow it up, and they'll probably extend the discussion that's already out there without breaking new ground. What I'd like to see 60 Minutes do is to put a team permanently on, say, crash wreckage and say, you guys don't have to do anything, just do that. And when you're ready to report on it, let us know if you find something, right? That's what they should be doing instead of, puff pieces on celebrities. They should be talking about what the real issues are in breaking ground. And I hope that they will do that. And for example, CNN has a 5-part series coming up, and people are dipping their toes in the water. Why don't they do it more? Here's what I would say, based on my, I don't know that my experience is any better or any worse than anybody else's, but here's my take on it, which is think of a network newsroom as high school. All right. And you want to be the cool kid, right? You want to be, the guy that things just, you look great. You're the cool kid, everything's great.
Right.
You don't want to get caught talking about something that's not cool. Right. And I think that they're still in high school a little bit about this. They think that they're going to get stuck and be made to look foolish. And that is the worst thing for a network correspondent. They do not want to look foolish. So, I think that is a self-correcting problem. Over the next 2 years, maybe faster, maybe a little bit slower, the idea that you'll look foolish because you talk about UAP is going to erode and go away. Yeah. And then more people will talk about it. But the answer to your question now is I just think they're still in high school.
It's so funny how almost every aspect of life always comes back to it. High school and the cliques and the stuff in there. It's like it doesn't matter what part of life I find myself in. It's like I could always relate it to high school. It's hilarious. Sorry,
I would say UFO Twitter is more like middle school, but go on.
Well,
that's where UFO Twitter is like the wastelands. It's like Mad Max. Like there's no laws in Twitter.
But yet it's too bad, because the truth is we're all on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. Right. You're on Twitter. I'm at Hollywood UFOs. Ross is at Ross Coulthart. Love getting Twitter followers. It's all fantastic. Follow you guys. Follow a lot of people. There needs to be a convivial and a civil place to talk. And I have to say, most people have treated me very well and respectfully, and I try to respect them and all that. There's been a few people just come out swinging in kind of a negative way that I'm not wild about.
Right.
And I that's too bad. I know I'm not the only one that has sort of suffered through that. Ross gets it. Lou Elizondo gets it. I mean, there is some of that out there. But I think what we can do as individuals with Twitter accounts is try to reward people for good civil behavior by thanking them either through private messages or literally in Twitter responses, and when people behave badly, stop talking to them.
Yeah, I'm curious. Are there any topics in this field that are just kind of too far into the woo for you to really consider and having conversations? Things like interdimensional stuff and conscious contact and all of that.
Well, I'm a Hollywood screenwriter now, so I'll talk about anything. I'll take anything seriously. As a journalist, I would have said a few years ago, yeah, there were some things that made me feel uncomfortable. I said on our podcast the other day that you were mentioning that it just never made sense to me that Dwight Eisenhower met with aliens. You know, I just
Right.
was like, I can't get my head around that. That just seems too weird. And now, you know, you think about the woo factor, which is sort of verging into the paranormal. And then, of course, I read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by my friend George Knapp and the others. And I was like, okay, well,
Dino
bring on the
beamers.
woo.
Yeah.
And I do think that when I said earlier, the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. I think there is an element of that. There is very clearly a nuts and bolts aspect to this, right? So that's not wrong, but it may not be the whole story, right? It doesn't have to be A or B. It might be C. Right.
Or it might be A, B, and C.
And C, or it might be Z.
Yeah.
Right. Which as a Zabel, I say it should be Z. But I think that we're the answers are not clear right now. And there is clearly, you know, like the idea of the hitchhiker phenomenon. I mean, if that isn't a movie, I don't know what is. I got to call George Knapp when we hang up here. And
well, if you are doing a hitchhiker, if you are doing a hitchhiker phenomena show, this could be a great name for it. The Woo Factor coming to NBC this fall. But yeah, I mean, look, I think that's kind of, especially we've been on a long, and it feels like we've been doing this now for 15 years. We've only been doing it for 2. But it feels.
Wait, how long have you been doing this?
This show 2 years officially this January.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's only been about what, guys, 8 or 9 months since we started doing these panels and bringing on guests. So this is sort of a new shift that we're getting into, and we have like a Bible, so to speak, on things that we always come back to. And you know, I like to believe, like you're saying, Bryce, no one's going to be right on this. When the dust settles, I think it's going to be so weird and so out there that nobody actually thought of it. You know, it'll be so different. It'll be so new and so almost incomprehensible. You won't even be able to describe it, even if you wanted to. That's how I think complex it is.
Well, so you really laid out kind of the issue, haven't you?
Yeah.
Because let's say you're Joe Biden and you actually know some weird shit is going down. You've been briefed and all that. And it's so freaking bizarre. It's woo times woo times woo, right? That even when they explain it, it's sort of like my kids trying to explain what NFT is to me. I hear them talk about it, and at the end of it, I'm like, yeah, but is it?
But what is it
worth money, right? Okay, so maybe Joe Biden's heard this over and over, and he's like, yeah, but what? And maybe there aren't the proper words even available to talk to people about it. Now, having said that, I will say one of the most popular articles I wrote last year for the Trail of the Saucers site on Medium is I wrote one about the UAP speech Joe Biden should give now. And I wrote him a speech. I sort of channeled my inner Aaron Sorkin, if you will, and wrote a speech for Joe Biden to give to the people that sort of allowed him to begin the discussion. And you know what? It wasn't half bad, and people really liked it. And I hope he delivers something like it in the next few years, because if he doesn't, then the next president's going to have to do it. Someone is going to have to take a big bite of that apple and say, look, people, I know this is a little strange and I wish I could be more comforting or whatever, but you know, it's my job. It's my duty as your highest elected official to tell you what I know and to try to keep us all safe. And so here's what I know, and here's what our plans are.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting day. That is for sure. I mean, I think the thing that we always try to come back to here, because there are a lot of theories, there's a lot of wild ideas, you know, sort of our terra firma is the idea that, first of all, we take the topic seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, because that's when you get into dangerous belief systems and cult-like behavior where we know this is what it is. So we're ambiguous as far as what we think it is, but we could always come back to the terra firma of, well, we know that our pilots are chasing them.
Yes.
We know that that they're catching them on radar on all sorts of sensitive information gathering systems. They've been seen by police officers. They've been seen by fishermen. They've been seen by everyday average Joes. There is a there.
Yes.
Now the question is, of course, obviously after that is, well, what is the there? And that's where put my hands up and I go, I have no clue, but that's the reality, right? Like that's where we all have to start. That's the starting point. And so I think once the normies, and when I say normies, I mean everybody outside of this world, can come to that common ground, I think that's when the conversation is really going to elevate to places. And especially because we're getting a lot from the experiencer side of this, we're not being heard. And I think they're going to have their day in the sun here. I really do. It's just, it's going to be a timing and patience thing.
You know, let me just throw one thought into the mix here, because I spend a lot of time. One thing I started doing when I first started working in Hollywood is it takes 20 minutes to fall asleep, right? For most people, right? And for 20 minutes, you're laying in bed and your mind has to think about something. And so I always park it someplace. I just sort of start thinking about something I'm working on or something I want to think about or whatever. And quite often I have new ideas in the morning, and that's kind of cool. And one of the things I've sort of been playing with is the idea that the problem is we say, as you just said, we really don't know anything. Is there anything that we really do know? What things can we say that we do know? And you just mentioned the prime one right now, which is our sensors and our pilots are telling us that something is out there. But I got another more intuitive one. Sometimes you can intuit certain knowledge. Here's one thing that I intuit from what we are facing right now. What do we know? Well, we know that humans and whoever these others are agree on one thing for sure. We know that we agree with them on something. And here's what I think we agree with. We agree that it should have been kept secret. Now, how can I prove that? Well, it's secret, right? Both parties in this equation, these others and humans, could have ended secrecy. Humans could have marched a leader out to the microphone bank and said, here's what we know. It's really happening. We are not alone. We're looking into it. But we've never done that officially, right? And they could have done the equivalent of landing on the White House lawn, right? Doing something really overt, not just flying over Washington, D.C., but landing outside or sending a message or doing something. Both parties have refused to do that. So we agree.
There is another option which is that the others just don't care, right?
Well, then by not caring, I guess in my extension of that, if you don't care, then I think if you didn't care at all, then you would have sort of accidentally done something a little more. I don't know. It just seems logical to me that there's probably intent there. I take your point, rather. I mean, you're not wrong, but I just think the odds are at least at the 80% level that we'd agree that it should be secret, or it should have been secret. Now, the follow-up to that is, do we still agree? Because we seem to be moving on a track where we're going to talk about it in a way that we haven't before. And the question is, do they have an opinion? Which goes to your point. Do these others, and by the way, is there one other? Are there multiple others? Who knows? Do they have an opinion? And then finally, this is not a fact. This is just my opinion. All right. But I've been thinking about these things since I wrote that first screenplay back in 1987, I think. And that is, I believe that all intelligent life is interested in all other intelligent life. So that explains to me why they're here. Now, my friend Stanton Friedman used to drive me out of my mind because he would always say, why would any intelligent life even want to come here, frankly, to be honest with you, because we're just this war, blah, 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 blah. And I just thought, you know what? I just disagree with them on that. I think we're fascinated. If we found another intelligent species, we'd be fascinated by them. I think intelligent life evolving differently must be one of the few things that's interesting in the universe once you figure out the physical universe.
I agree with that completely.
That's why they're here.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating to hear like guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about that very issue. It's like, well, why would they be interested in us? That's as interesting as we are in an ant pile. And it's like, yeah, but an ant pile on a different planet, bro.
But we also have people who
People have
study
ant farms. Yeah.
I have to say, I don't know if you know this, and I don't know
you're a huge ant farm.
How whimsical this is. But last year on the Trail of the Saucer site on Medium, I issued a public challenge to Neil deGrasse Tyson to debate UAP.
Yeah.
And I was serious about it. I've just heard enough from this guy where he turns UAP and people who are knowledgeable about it or have experienced it or seen it into a punchline for his jokes. And he uses the same lines over and over. He never extends the argument. He's never open-minded enough to want to have that discussion. And look, I don't, he might wipe the floor up with me. I mean, he might, but somebody's got to call this guy out. So I did. And I'm going to keep calling him out. I think that he's wrong, but I will treat him with respect. And I'll debate him wherever he wants to do it. I think we need to set 2 hours aside and do it.
Here.
And we're a 2-hour show. I'd be more than happy to oblige
I think you'll get some ratings if we get Neil deGrasse Tyson to debate UAP.
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt. Well, Bryce Zabel, thank you so damn much for coming aboard and getting weird with us here. This was a very fun conversation.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day. I mean, we didn't even get to the cards on the board there, which I'm very familiar with. I'm dying to know what's on those cards because I know those are production cards and things you're working on. So before you get out of here, please tell everyone where they can find your work, where they can find, we've got the links, of course, down below, but the floor is yours.
Sure.
You've got a minute. Okay,
great. Listen, I appreciate that. And I just want to say how much I enjoyed doing this today. It is kind of freewheeling and I didn't have to do the technical work of setting it up. So that makes me feel very nice. And I liked talking to all three of you guys. It was fascinating. So thank you. And for people at home who are either watching or listening to this, I just want to say there's a couple ways to sort of participate with my sort of evolution and discussion of this. The podcast with Ross Coulthard is called Need to Know with Coulthard and Zabel. So if you went to Apple or Spotify, you'd have to search for the whole thing because there's other Need to Know podcasts. And you can find our website at needtoknow.today. And my site where I write all these articles and do my own investigations is trailofthesaucers.com. And it's on Medium, trailofthesaucers.com. And my Twitter feed is at Hollywood UFOs. So that's enough self-promotion for me for today. I appreciate the opportunity.
Our absolute pleasure, sir. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I can't wait to have you back on the show. Maybe I'll convince you and Ross to come on at the same time. That could be fun too, just to pick both your brains at the same time. I mean, again, having two guys that love to talk shop is always fun. So, so we appreciate it truly. And again, here's the link for truth or trailofthesaucers.com. So guys, all the links are in the chat. So please go support Bryce, support Ross. They're doing great work. And we're really lucky that they've entered into the fray here as far as the conversation goes. Mr. Zabel, enjoy the weekend, enjoy happy hour. And
excellent.
And yeah, if you do audition for this new show here, get your people in contact with my people. Maybe I can throw in an audition tape.
I think you've set me back because I saw your ads and they were the old fat Bryce pictures. So I don't think anyone's going to put me on.
I don't think you look. I thought you looked stunning in the tuxedo, sir. So
I have to admit, I'll leave you with this thought. Since the pandemic, I've lost 32 pounds because I ate my way through the pandemic and then just said this is unacceptable. So
I am right there with
nice
you,
to
my
meet
friend.
you, Bryce.
I'm right behind you. All right, Bryce.
Thank you, guys.
All
right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, fun show.
Great show.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, of course, I want to say thank you to DOS Tapes. They provide all the tunes you hear on the show. The show will be available on podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. Leave us a rate review, goes a long way. Thank you to the Patreon members, future Patreon members, to the super chats that we got, and to the YouTube memberships we got. We got a couple new memberships today. Thank you, Lassa and Space Lady, for the $20 donation. Happy Friday to the UCR team. My mom with a $20 donation. Thanks, Mom. Mans and Simon Wales, new members. You guys, I can't appreciate you enough. Thank you so damn much for being a part of the show and supporting the show in the way you do. And thank you, everyone who also supports the shows through likes, subscribes, and shares. That's a wonderful way to help support the show. If you can't do it with your dollar, no worries. There's no paywalls here. Nothing's hidden from you. You guys have all the access as the people who pay. So I hope you appreciate it. Moderators, thank you. Check out the links again in the description below for the Discord, for the merch store, for KGRADB, for Michael Mataluni, for Rather Be Squidding. Thank you so damn much for coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review. Your home for credible news, reviews, and commentary on everything UAP and UFO. Until next time, you guys, stay safe out there. We love y'all. Peace. I think we're cut off from KGRA, so we can do this now. I hope so. We'll see. I don't know. Time will tell. Let me get us out of here. I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom! You're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.